So last part looked at how we can come to believe things are effective or are scientifically sound when they're not. So we can believe things are good for our health based on them having all this scientific stuff couched around it, and it's not true. So with that knowledge that we can be easily fooled by things that sound scientific, it should be all the more obvious to us when we come to things in the Word that we think, I'm not sure that I agree with that morally, or science has proven something different to what the Word says. We should all be aware that we can be fooled and we can be led astray. And that even if we were experts in a field, if it opposes what the Word says, then it's that's wrong and not the Word. So Deuteronomy 21:15, when a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and they have borne him children, both the loved and the unloved, and the firstborn son is of her who is unloved, then it has been on the day of causing his sons to inherit his possessions, he is not allowed to treat the son of the beloved wife, as firstborn in the face of the son of the unloved, who is truly the firstborn. Two wives, one is the truly loved wife, the other isn't. Your firstborn son happens to come from the unloved wife. When you're giving your possessions to them, you might want to treat the other firstborn child of the loved wife. You might want to give your possessions to them, as Jacob did, incidentally, with Joseph. He gave Joseph the double portion blessing that was to go to the firstborn. Rachel was the loved wife. Leah was the unloved wife. And yet he didn't give the double portion to Reuben, who was the son of Leah. But he is to acknowledge the son of the unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For he is the beginning of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. Now you might be like Jacob. You might think, well, I don't want to give it to Reuben because Reuben, he was trying to do this and he was trying to do that. Reuben really wasn't somebody that I want to be honoring. So you might look at this and you might say, well, that's not in accordance with my morality. That's not what I think you should do. Yehovah says that is the way that it must be done. So what do? We don't lean on our own understanding of the situation. We trust in Yehovah. When a man has a wayward and rebellious son who is not listening to the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have disciplined him, does not listen to them, then his father and his mother have taken hold of him and brought him out to the elders of the city, to the gate of his city, and they've said to the elders of his city, this son of ours is wayward and rebellious. He is not listening to our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst, and let all Yisrael hear and fear. So people might say, I'm to take my son out and they're to stone my son to death. That doesn't sound like something I want to do. I'm not going to do that. This, of course, isn't a small child. Okay, if they're a glutton and a drunkard, this is somebody who is at least advanced somewhat in their teenage years. But this is someone who has become rebellious and wayward. Okay, and this is something that parents allow to happen. Now, this is when they have disciplined him. Well, this becomes a point of contention for people, whether or not to discipline their children at all and how to discipline their children. Some people have taken on the sort of, progressive thought of the SJW that has been acquired from these little tiny nuggets of information that has been weaved together into like a map of the world that makes sense to them. And they think that all children are actually these precious little snowflakes, and a child does no evil. And it's actually when the parents inflict discipline on the child then the child can start to become wayward and rebellious. But that's actually in contradistinction. It is opposed to what the word of Elohim says. This is from Hand-in-Hand Parenting. Okay, so this is the sort of information which is readily available to people who are just going about trying to be good parents, and they're researching on the internet, how is the best way to be a good parent? Many studies have been done on spanking in the United States and in other countries. The evidence is clear that the effects on children are negative. The American Academy of Pediatrics and a long list of other professional societies take a clear stand against the corporal punishment, that's hitting children, of children both at home and in the schools. One study showed that the more parents spank children for antisocial behavior, the more the antisocial behavior increased. The more children are hit, the more likely they are to hit others, including peers and siblings, and as adults, the more likely they are to hit their spouses. So anybody who is a parent who is looking to raise a good child might come across this information and say, oh, we've got all of the points that we looked at in the first part. This is backed by science. Okay, we've got scientific studies that show this, and I don't want them to become antisocial. And it makes sense to me that if you hit a child, you're going to make a child violent. People believe very much the same sort of thing when it comes to dogs. If you hit a dog, what you do is you create a violent dog. And this is something that has truth in certain circumstances. This is where we can go back to things like the reliability of a study. So one study showed that the more parents spanked their children for antisocial behavior, the more antisocial behavior increased. Okay. What was the sample size? Who were the people being studied? Who were the people doing the study? If it was the Anti-Spanking Association doing the study, then it's probably going to be biased. If the people who are being studied are people who are hitting their children in aggression because they're angry with them, then that's going to have a different result to people who are hitting their children to discipline them. People for whom it would be painful to discipline their children. It's not something that they want to do, as opposed to somebody who is aggressive, who wants to hit the child in order to punish them and make them feel bad for making them feel bad. They're two totally different things. Also, are these people who follow the Word of God. The Word of God says to spank your children. Maybe if that exists isolated from the rest of the practice of the Word of God, then that could be a bad thing. But to look at this and say, it's been scientifically proven that hitting your children increases antisocial behavior is just inaccurate for all of the reasons that we were looking at in the first part. Cesar Millan is somebody who, like him or dislike him, maybe if you don't like the idea of hitting dogs, you're going to dislike this guy. The reason that I put him up is because he disproves this theory. You might not like the idea of hitting dogs just as your own morality, but when you're considering, does hitting children or hitting dogs make them violent later in life, you only have to look to this man's practices. He will come along and he will physically discipline a dog, not in anger, but to exert control, to say, I'm the one in control, you're the one who should be listening. And the dogs respond to him. And he can take a violent dog and make it a very well-behaved dog. That disproves the hypothesis that hitting a dog in any circumstance will make it violent. Same is true with children. If you go about disciplining them angrily, then you may well cause negative effects. It certainly seems like some studies have suggested it. But that's not all situations. So these things have not been scientifically proven. And in fact, we have a great famous example of somebody who disproves that, whether or not you like the practice morally. So the guy that I talked about before, Peter Ditto, just that psychologist who investigated the emotional drivers that we have in situations and intuitive drivers about things and how they affect how we interpret information. So Ditto and his former student, Brittany Liu, have shown the link between people's moral convictions and their assessment of facts. They found people who were morally opposed to condom education, for example, were less likely to believe that condoms were effective at preventing pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases. Similarly, when people had moral qualms about capital punishment, that's the death penalty, they were less likely to believe it was an effective way to deter crime. So the same is true with something like corporal punishment. If somebody has a moral qualm with hitting a child, they are less likely to believe that that will be effective in disciplining them. In fact, they will believe that it's likely to be ineffective at disciplining the child. So when somebody is in that situation, they're likely to believe scientific data which leans one way or another. But we, as people who are set apart, people who believe the word of Yehovah, okay, that is the only thing that we can trust, and we know that we can be led astray very easily by our emotions and by our intuitions. And when we look at science and we say, well, this science proves one thing or another. Okay, so people must conform themselves to the word, leaning on that rather than on their own understanding of things. The only source one can rely upon is what the word says. That's the only thing that you can say, that is true. And I know that that is true. And I know that if I do that, then it will have good outcomes. If science as you understand it opposes that, then that is of zero consequence. It's a matter of belief and unbelief. We know that belief is equated with obedience. Okay? You cannot believe without being obedient. And unbelief is equated with disobedience. So if you're disobedient when the word says that when you raise children, you should discipline them, and that discipline should be physical, that is unbelief of his word. It's not believing it. Proverbs 23:13-14 says, do not withhold discipline from a child. And you get people who are very progressive in their outlooks, and they will say, no, I'm not going to discipline my child physically. I'm just going to speak to them very calmly and very civilly until they stop throwing a tantrum and they do whatever it is. And that's the right way to do it, because I don't want to inflict any psychological damage on them. And there's all these papers that show that if you speak to children in the wrong way, you're going to cause them harm. So we've looked at those studies are not like established science. You have to understand that those things may not be right, and when the word is opposed to them, that they're not right. Next it says, if you beat him with a rod, he does not die. The word is nakah, okay, often translated as smite. So the discipline that it's talking about here is to smite or to beat a child with a rod. Verse 14 says, beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from Sheol. Okay, so the discipline that you're not to withhold is physical. This is where people will go into the realm of changing the meaning of the word of Elohim and say, oh, when it says beat him with a rod, it's talking about this figurative thing or that figurative thing, and it means this or that. And they'll go with a definition that allows them to continue to be the way that they want to be. They will not look at this and say, well, this verse says that my moral convictions are wrong. They will instantly look to any little thing that they see as a get out. But this word nakah, the idea of disciplining somebody by nakahing them with a rod. Okay, the fact that it says if you beat them, they won't die should show us that it's something physical. But Exodus 21 says, and when a man nakahs his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand. Okay, so this is talking about nakating them so that they die. It's the same thing. It's punishment of a male or female servant. Here, if you do it excessively so that they die, then he shall certainly be punished. Okay, and it goes into the punishment for this. But we can see that this discipline with a rod, this smiting or beating with a rod, is something that is physical. Proverbs 22:15 tells us something very interesting about children for anybody who thinks, oh, they're just these innocent little souls and there's no wickedness or evil that exists within them. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline drives it far from him. Okay. Beating with the rod, that will drive the folly which is in the heart of a child far from them. It's not the culture that we exist in. Okay, and you can find science that disagrees with this. But as we've looked at, that's not reliable. We are not experts in those things. We can come to be misled about those things, and if we never read the studies, then we can just go around saying it's been scientifically proven that hitting children is bad for them. That's a misleading statement. The rod of discipline drives this from the child. We're also told in Luke 12:47-48, okay, that servant who knew his master's desire, did not prepare, nor did according to his desire, shall be beaten with many stripes. This is the beating of the servant that we saw, the nakating of the servant with the rod. But he who did not know, yet did what deserved flogging, shall be beaten with few. So, in Yehovah's eyes, there are acts that deserve this punishment. Okay? As for servants, it's the same punishment with children. It's a physical punishment. It drives the folly which is in their hearts far from them, because children aren't just natural little innocent beings. Okay, children are fallen beings. Even a child is known by his deeds, whether his work is clear and right. Even a child. The wrong have been estranged from the womb. These who speak lies go astray from birth. Okay? So the idea that children are innocent and you're going to damage the precious little snowflake and they're going to turn out to be bad is actually entirely backwards to what the word of Elohim says. Okay? Children have wickedness within them just as much as any of us do. He who spares his rod hates his son. Hates his son. But he who loves him, so you want to love your children, seeks him with discipline. So people have got it entirely backwards. They say, oh no, that's not a loving way to be. That's a hateful way to be, disciplining them with a rod. But he who spares the rod in Yehovah's eyes, and therefore in actuality and objective truth, hates his son. Discipline your son because there is hope. Okay, so to people who've got wayward and rebellious children, this is the result. This is the advice, rather. Discipline your son because there is hope. Do not set your soul on his death. Okay, the Torah says if they're wayward and rebellious, take them out to the elders of the city and they will be stoned. This tells us, if you see this start to happen, there is hope. Don't set your soul on, well, this one's just going to be a wrong and forever. They're going to go astray, be wayward and rebellious, and then it's going to come a time when they're at such an age when they're going to be taken out to the elders and they're going to be killed. A rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child unrestrained brings shame to his mother. So how do you restrain the child? With the rod and reproof. You tell them where they're wrong and you discipline them physically, because if not, a child that is not disciplined in such a way brings shame to his mother. When the wrong have become many, transgression increases, but the righteous look on their fall. Discipline your son, and he brings you rest and delight to your life. So again, it's a question of, do you believe the word? Maybe this is completely against your morality, and you think, I'm just not really the sort of person who disciplines a child and tells them off and hits them when they're really stepping out of line. If you do so, it brings rest and delight to your life, or it will bring shame to you. Hebrews 12:5-11 teaches us about discipline. You have forgotten the appeal which speaks to you as sons. My son, do not despise the discipline of Yehovah, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For whom Yehovah loves, he disciplines, and flogs every son whom he receives. Okay, just like the discipline of a parent, an earthly parent. If you endure discipline, Elohim is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom a father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become sharers, then you are illegitimate and not sons or not children. Moreover, we indeed had fathers of our flesh disciplining us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? So our fathers disciplined us, okay, and it causes us to have respect for them. For they indeed disciplined us for a few days as seemed best to them, but he does it for our profit, that we might share in his set apartness. And indeed, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. This is how discipline needs to be. This is what trains us to be different. If you're just speaking very gently to somebody to try and convince them, and they've got wickedness in their heart, it's not going to be effective. But afterwards, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So the scriptures are very clear what the nature of this discipline is, what the outcome is if you don't discipline, and what the outcome is if you do discipline. Exodus 21 verse 15 says, he who smites his father or mother shall certainly be put to death. Okay, so if a child is to do the opposite, is to beat or to smite, to nakah his father or his mother, then that child is put to death. So anybody loving their children is going to want to avoid raising up a little terror that it's going to end up striking their father or mother, or one who's going to end up being wayward and rebellious. And we're told that that's the outcome without discipline. The outcome with discipline is that it will bring peace to your life.